All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're calling this work session of the Wake County Board of Education to order. Today is October 15th, 2024, at approximately 3:33 p.m. One item on our agenda today, and it's a big one. We have draft 2 of our Office of Student Reassignments 2025-2026 WCPSS School Enrollment Plan. I see Mr. Casa and Ms. Pointe. Whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right, well, thank you. Staff is bringing to you the feedback review for the 2025-2026 school enrollment plan. Before we get kicked off, I just wanted to say thank you to board members, the public, parents, and more importantly, staff for showing up to our public engagement session that we had at Herbert Akins Road Middle School. Again, we've done events like this in the past, but this one was exceptionally well. I think we had many more departments available for families. We had parents who were engaging with staff members, getting their questions answered. So I really wanted to say thank you to everyone for making that such a terrific event. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you. And I always like to start, Chair Higgity, Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler, Superintendent Taylor, and members of the board with a thank you to all of the staff that have gotten us to this point. So again, of course, our community partners, we would have no feedback to review if they weren't participating and engaging in the process. And so we are very thankful for those that do actively engage with our different public engagement opportunities to give us the information that we need to be able to share with you what the thoughts and opinions of the district membership are related to the initial draft. In addition, our entire planning team, which includes obviously the staff in the Office of Student Assignment, our facilities design and construction partners, long-range planning, Office of Geospatial Analytics, Real Estate Services, Magnet Curriculum Enhancement Services or programs, our transportation department, obviously with some of the initiatives that we have before us, tech services getting us ready for our address lookups, as well as, of course, the academics department this year, really more so than in other years. They've really taken on supporting us in this process. So just thank you. And I do want to just pause for a moment and say thank you to our principals. They're doing a really great job of helping us to really engage our families so that it's not all coming from the central office, but we have a lot of messaging that's coming directly from our principals to help families engage in this process. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Corrali Tornow and the entire communications department for their efforts in getting us to the point where our website is ready to launch and where all of the information that we'll share with you today is available to all members of the public. As Glenn shared, we're here for our feedback review. In previous years, this time of year, we would call it draft 2, and we've just sort of tried to really change that conversation dynamic to say we have a draft. We're going to review the feedback and see if we need to adjust that draft. That way, if we do make changes or don't make changes, we're not setting false expectations for the community. Specifically, our purpose for today is to make sure that we're sharing with you all of that feedback, in addition, specifically our responses to that feedback. We're also going to review some recommended adjustments that are being made in response to that feedback, and then to seek any conversation or dialogue from the board members to help us figure out what we may need to do as we prepare for the final review and approval later in November. Just as a friendly reminder for the strategic plan alignment for this work, it's in family and community engagement, those aims 6 and 12 related to communication and community engagement, as well as in operational effectiveness, looking at our differentiated resource allocation and our transportation upgrades. The policy that drives this work is Board Policy 4150 and school assignment and transfers, particularly Section A, drawing of school attendance areas. And as we remind everyone during each of these presentations, there are 4 pillars the board has identified as critical to being reviewed during assignment planning processes. And those are student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. And as a reminder, those are defined very specifically in policy. However, we did want to alert you that we have an updated video, thanks again to our communications department and partners, that is more modernized and helps us to better understand these 4 pillars. And our Spanish language version of that is coming soon. As an overview, we'll start with the review and updates. We'll go through that relatively quickly. Then we'll spend the bulk of our time on our responses to the community requests and questions. We've given you some slide numbers for reference just to help you figure out where the significant amount of time today will be spent. The adjustments to the initial draft will then be reviewed. We'll talk about them as we're talking about the responses to feedback, but then we'll clarify towards the end of the presentation what specific adjustments we're recommending in those 5 key areas. And then we'll do a quick review of the planning and timeline and then open it up for discussion and dialogue. So, Chair, if it's okay with you, we'd ask that you hold questions.
All right, thank you.
So let's start with the review and updates. Just as a reminder, this is a 6-step process that we follow, and we're currently actively in step 4. We stay in this space for quite a long time. It starts as early as March and goes all the way till the end of November. Once we complete this cycle, and I kind of want to key this up, we'll then come to you with, hey, once the assignment plan's approved, where do we still have some concerns related to crowding, and what types of capping recommendations might we need to bring to you? So our partners in long-range planning and our school choice planning and assignment team will be bringing those to you, I think, as early as December. Yes. Once we have the formal plan approved. And then that will follow on the heels of that will be step 6, which is, okay, now where do we need to look at our utilization concerns that haven't been addressed by either the assignment plan or capping, and oftentimes those are conversations related to calendar. So just a quick refresher, I'll remind everyone that green sort of color in the top right corner lets you know, or those boxes that you're seeing in the top right corner let you know that you've already seen this before. So just as a friendly reminder, the planning process itself for the enrollment plan began in March of this year, where we had public engagement activities to capture thoughts and ideas. We won't go over those again, but just to remind everyone, the assignment planning site is where you can find those summaries of all of the information that was collected during that time. Then in May, we came and talked with you as a board to make sure we were clarifying what goals you had for the 25-26 enrollment plan. You've seen this before and talked about this at length. We wanted to make sure we were opening our 4 new schools appropriately, continuing to address capped and overcrowded schools where possible, as well as maintaining our focus on school choice options, specifically as they relate to Board Policy 4150 and our magnet objectives, as well as our operational efficiency objectives. Then in September, we brought for you the initial draft of the enrollment plan. We spent a great amount of time talking through each of the individual recommendations related specifically to the 4 new schools, as well as others to address those other concerns we identified in May. As a reminder, all of that information can be found on the enrollment proposal website, so the one highlighted here at the top of the screen. During the month of September, we continued our work with public engagement, specifically reaching out to families to give them the opportunity to ask us questions, to help us identify areas of concern, as well as to better understand what supports are available for families as they transition to a different school if they are impacted by the school assignment. So we will spend a little bit of time talking about what we've been doing ever since we saw you on September 3rd. But before we do that, one of the common pieces of feedback we receive, or questions or concerns we receive, is how is this feedback actually used? Does it make a difference? And we realized as a district, we've maybe not told that story very well, and we wanted to make sure that those of you that are plugging in for the first time this year, there are lots of things that have changed over the last several years in response to feedback. So some examples that you'll see here on slide 19. For our stability rules for new elementary schools, historically, we only allowed rising 5th grade students the opportunity for a stability transfer. In addition, if they had younger siblings, they were also only eligible for that 1 year the 5th grader was still at the school. And then the following year, those younger siblings would be asked to go to the newly assigned school. Because of parent feedback, we've expanded that to include not only 5th graders, but 4th graders, and to allow those younger siblings to have the option to stay through the end of 5th grade themselves. So just providing expanded stability. At the high school level, similarly, because we open our high schools with just 9th and 10th grade, and we've been doing that for quite some time, because of that, the 9th and 10th grade students usually were only eligible to remain at the school with their older sibling for the 1 or 2 years that the older sibling was there, and then were asked to go to the new school as they transitioned into 11th and 12th historically. As a result of the feedback we've been receiving from families, we allow those younger siblings the option to stay through the 12th grade so they can have that stability of assignment over time. Similarly, you can see how we've expanded those stability rules for any changes that involve going from a school that's already open to another school that's already open, or what we sometimes call existing school transfers. And in here, we've really been working to provide the most stability we possibly can, allowing all students at all grades the opportunity to stay through the terminal grade of the school. We haven't opened any middle schools recently, so that's why they're not up here, but I'm sure we'll have some feedback as we open up middle schools in the coming years that will impact our recommendations for stability transfers. Some other things that may go unnoticed. It may not be known to everybody in this room if you've not been with the district for a long time, or if as a family you've not been plugged in. But historically, the assignment plan will be brought to the board in December as a first draft and would not be approved until February. giving families very little time to digest those final decisions as they prepared for the start of the new school year. So over the last several years, decade or so, we've been working to up that timeline. In fact, this year on September 3rd, that was the earliest we've ever brought an enrollment proposal to you for consideration. So we have been responsive to feedback to try to get that information to families as early as possible. The frequency of base assignment changes. There was a time period not so long ago where you could be reassigned this year and then again the year after, as new schools were rapidly opening in certain portions of our district. Since that time, again, over the last 10 or so years, there have been adjustments to where we try to limit that to no more frequent than every 3 years. Last year, based on feedback from families, we actually changed the operating calendar of a school because of the magnitude of the reassignment that was projected. So that's all based on community and family feedback. And you can see other opportunities on the right. We've expanded the opportunities for providing public input to as early as March, where historically it wasn't until after the first draft was released. So again, go way back in history, that would have been December. So now we've upped that all the way to March, to where we're engaging families as early as we can to make sure that they understand what the potential impacts are. The opportunities for transitioning to schools, as we opened, Glenn shared with you that we hosted a live in-person open house, and we've been expanding that ability to help families better understand what resources the district does have available to help them as they transition to a new or a different school. And then the stability of assignment. It used to be, as recent as maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that we worked really hard to make sure that new schools opened with a pretty robust population, which meant we took a lot of existing neighborhoods and assigned them into those schools. And then maybe 2 or 3 years later, we need to assign them back out as the new development in those attendance areas took off. We've learned from the community they prefer just allow those schools to more gradually fill and maybe don't put so many existing students into new schools. So we have seen a shift in our planning strategies over the last couple of years to do a better mix of that newly developing or undeveloped areas with existing families. So just some quick points to show that the feedback does matter and does have an impact, and even later today you'll see that there is some impact from the feedback this year as well. So thank you to all of our community members who continue to engage in our public engagement processes. Just to give you some awareness about what we did, we held 4 virtual information sessions to really hone in on specific aspects of the different new schools that were opening, as well as any related assignment adjustments in those regions. And then we also held a general overview session as a virtual session. So altogether, between those 4 virtual sessions and the 1 open house, we had a total of 379 participants. 284 of them were in our virtual setting and 95 were in person. It is possible that the same family might have gone to a virtual session and came to our open house. However, we did have a total participation rate of 379. Also, I just checked yesterday, the views of the recordings of those virtual information sessions are anywhere from 102 to 122 views as of yesterday, around 4 o'clock. So we are also getting a lot of traction from our community in watching the videos that were recordings of those virtual information sessions. And we'll have that fully updated information for you at the November 26th meeting. So what did we hear? There's a lot of information on these slides, and so I don't want to read them to you word for word. Obviously, you can look through these as we go through the last part of our planning process leading up to the 26th vote. But the Felton Grove High School and Western Region session really kicks us off with something you're going to see in every single session we've been in, which is an emphasis on stability. How families define stability may be slightly different, but the concept of having stable school assignments is really important to almost every member of our community, and so I don't want that to be left unsaid. Some things that were specifically addressed or available to our open house because of feedback like this. You see things on here about special programs and 504 students. You see things on here about what kinds of courses the new school is going to be able to offer, what levels of advanced courses might be offered. You might even see questions in here about extracurricular activities or athletics. So we made sure those staff were available to specifically answer family members' questions at our open house. And so that's, again, a way that the feedback is really changing the way we do public engagement as well. Because this is a high school, there were also some specific concerns you can see on the top right of the slide related to traffic and teen drivers, and so that is a unique perspective for the families that are thinking about their students transitioning to a different high school. Is what is that commute going to look like, and how is that going to be different from what they're already prepared for? When we look at the session that we held for Bowling Road and Rex Road and the Southern Region, because these schools had so many overlapping impacts, we held this as a combined session. Again, as I mentioned, stability will show up in every single one of these sessions. We got a lot of information that people felt like some of the timelines were unclear. We heard that maybe the planning process wasn't clearly outlined, and so we're continuing to evaluate that because, as you know, we've worked really hard over the last several years to adjust the way that we share information about our planning process, even developing that assignment planning site. So if that's not quite sufficient to meet the needs, we're going to continue to adapt and evolve that. However, here you're seeing some specific concerns about lack of transportation for stability transfers. That does come up frequently in all sessions. And then, of course, some things that were able to be addressed at our open house, questions about track assignments and class sizes and how do we hire new staff. So again, we thank our partners for being available at the open house to help answer some of those questions. The next information session that we had was, again, a combined session focusing on the new Pleasant Plains, but also the new capacity available at Baucom Elementary, as well as other sort of cascading or domino impacts in the western region. I'll just say it one more time, stability, right, and continuity came up as a key piece. Calendar consistency was a really specific concern for this area, mostly because some schools that are being impacted by the plan are going from a tradition, those families would maybe be traditional today, the new Pleasant Plains is multi-track, or I might be at an Olive Chapel that's multi-track and being recommended to, let's say, go to a Baucom, which is traditional. So there were just some concerns about the calendar consistency and how that sometimes feels like an even greater magnitude of reassignment. And then our general overview really was truly a general overview. We had questions from every aspect of the plan in this session, not only the areas that were sort of outside of the new school openings, but also questions again about the new school openings. So we're glad that we were able to provide this general overview. Stability again was top of mind for most of the participants in this session. Again, talking about students with special needs. So we were again very thankful that they were available to help us at our open house to answer some of those questions directly. Here we saw just a general global concern about traffic and bus dependence. There are some families that are concerned that maybe their new school assignment is going to create more bus traffic perhaps, or that it might be a longer distance from their current home. Most of them are more proximate, but there are a handful that are a little bit further. We did try to reach out to those that came to our open house and ask them, you know, what was most beneficial to you have at the session. I will say we had what I would consider a lackluster response rate, so we're going to work to try to come up with a better way to capture this feedback from our participants. But of those who did participate in that follow-up survey, clearly academics was top of mind, either secondary or elementary level. Almost everybody rated academics as a key thing that they were glad to have at the open house and to be able to talk with staff members from those departments. The other actually had the second highest rating, and when we combined all of the thoughts and ideas that people selected for other, it was having board members present to be able to talk to, or it was having the new school tables set up and existing principals to be able to talk with them about what it's like to open a new school or transition to a different school. So that was really top of mind as a priority and a thankfulness to have that there. And then you can see how everything else fell out in the ratings in terms of how valuable the participants thought the resources were for them. So, lesson learned, we're going to work to try to get even more participation in this just so we can continue to improve our events. The other thing for the open house that we asked our participants in that survey was what maybe could have been here that wasn't here. So that's really helpful for us to make a better session in the future. And then overall, how effective was this for you? Did it meet your expectations as to what you thought you were going to see? And what we noticed is that there's a bit of a combined effect. For those that thought it was maybe moderately effective or less so, it was reliant on maybe not having a specific explainer on the assignment plan. We had thought that we had done that with the virtual sessions and that people would be tired of hearing that and wouldn't want to hear that at the open house, but we learned differently that they would like to hear a little bit more about explaining the plan itself. So we will make adaptations and adjustments to future open house events. And then, of course, we had the thought exchange kind of underpinning all of this, running concurrent with all of these sessions. And in the thought exchange, we specifically asked families to help us better understand what they needed or what questions that they had to help them better understand how the plan might impact their family. We had 1,339 total participants, and they placed a total of 1,503 thoughts. So just as a reminder, the thought exchange in this particular format that we used allows an individual to post sort of a sticky note type idea with a follow-up explainer. It does have some limits on the total number of characters, but the intent is to be brief. So so that there's individual ideas on each individual thought. So you'll notice with the 1,503 thoughts that some participants did post more than one thought. Once they're done posting those sort of virtual sticky note thoughts, then they're presented with a random assortment of thoughts from throughout the district for all the participants that were putting in thoughts, and asked to rate them. How important is this to you, or how much does this resonate with you? The scale is 1 to 5, with 1 being the least, resonating with me, and 5 being the highest. Participants are asked to try and rate 30 thoughts because that adds to the validity of the rating system. And so with the ratings ratio of 23, that's pretty good. That means we can feel pretty confident that the results we're seeing are reflective of the sort of sentiment of the entire district. Here's just a by the number screenshot. I know it's a little bit small, but we are not surprised that the overwhelming majority of participants identified themselves as being either from Southern Wake, Southwestern Wake, or Western Wake, because this is where the new schools are opening. So it did make sense to us that those families would participate at a higher rate. It also doesn't surprise us that some of the other regions had a lower participation rate because there were very minor changes throughout the rest of the district. We worked really hard this year to focus most of the enrollment planning recommendations on the opening of new schools. So that doesn't necessarily surprise us because we know they're plugging in because they saw that they were potentially impacted. What best describes your role, just as a reminder, that's a multi-select. So if I'm a parent and a teacher, or if I'm a community member and a student, I might be able to select more than one, so those will not add up to 100 because family or participants are able to select whatever it is that applies to them. The top themes that came out of the thought exchange fell into these 5 core categories. The first is proximity and commute. The next is stability and consistency. Then calendar alignment, academic impact, and community and social connections. You'll see here a brief description of kind of the types of comments that were posted in each of these themes to give you an idea of how they were aligned into those categories. This is a global representation of all of the participants and how the comments generally were categorized throughout the entire thought exchange. Here you'll see a volume text. In each of these categories, how many thoughts fell into that particular category. So by sheer frequency of thought, community and social connections came up as the most frequently commented or type of thought posted. Again, if you add all these up, they're going to add up to way more than 1,503 because a thought can be cross-identified in as many as 2 categories. So it's possible that they talked about community and social connections and how being close to their neighbors was important, so maybe it fell into both proximity and commute and social, or community and social connections. So please don't try to add these up to 1,503 because it will not work. What we have always found to be one of the better aspects of this tool is the ratings portion of it. So although calendar alignment was actually listed as the 5th most frequent comment, in other words, it was the lowest number of total comments, it got the highest level of ratings. I do want to caution, it got a total average of 3.8, and all the others got a 3.7. But the shift is a decent magnitude, that although there weren't very many comments specifically about calendar alignment, they did get very highly rated. Academic impact actually was listed as 4th in terms of total number of comments, but it came up 2nd highest in the rating system. Community and social interactions was 1st in terms of total volume, but then got like an average number of ratings and was 3rd. And you can kind of do that cross comparison for yourself, but just noticing that the power of the ratings is to let us know that when other people are seeing those thoughts, they're rating them at a level that lets us sort of counterbalance the fact that maybe there weren't very many comments. Certainly there's a lot of energy around it. So we clearly get the calendar alignment is important to all participants. One question that we got from the community was, why are we doing this all together? How does anybody who's in the eastern part of the county know what's happening to us in the western part of the county? And so we do this by design this way because we want to have a whole district perspective on what's happening to the entire assignment plan. However, on our website, you'll see that there are links to the individual reports by area, the question that we asked at the entry to ask what area do you align with, so people can go and look at those individual reports. So by way of example, the southeastern area, which was kind of Garner, they actually had 3 or 4 things that rated above a 4.20. when they were rating thoughts for their community. So we do disaggregate the data and look at it from both perspectives. We just, for brevity, did not bake it into the presentation, but if anybody wants to see those reports, they are posted to the website and you can look at them by region. And then one of the things we want to not shy away from, anybody can see this who logs into the thought exchange. What are the highest rated thoughts? And so the 3 highest rated thoughts all really came from the same area and one of the same recommendations related to some assignment changes that are going to impact all of Chapel Elementary and Baucom Elementary and some particular communities. So that's just to let you know that overall, these were the highest rated thoughts in the entire thought exchange, just so that you can get a line of sight into what had a lot of supportive energy from the community at large. As far as the key takeaways, not to be redundant to the themes or the theme descriptions, but this is just what we learned, right? What's top of mind is proximity and commute concerns. And we've seen a shift. I think Glenn can kind of address, sort of support this. We've seen a shift towards this over the last maybe 5 or so years, really coming off the heels of the COVID pandemic, is that proximity and commute concerns really have elevated and become a much higher priority for families than they historically have been as a district. So it's just something for us to know. Calendar consistency has been something we've struggled with as a district since we brought on our first year round elementary school. And so it continues to be a common thread for families that trying to find a way to have calendar consistency is important. And it's in 2 categories. I'd like to highlight that. It's not just on having calendar alignment, let's say K-8 or K-12. It's also when reassignments have need changing calendars. I'm currently attending a school on calendar A. The reassignment is recommending that I go to a different school that would have the opposite calendar. So it's both aspects of that are really coming up as a common key takeaway for us, that these are important and concerns for families. I mentioned early on stability is a sort of a no-brainer. It comes up with every single conversation I have with any group, regardless of what the topic is. How do we provide stable school assignments for families wherever possible? And just really avoid frequent reassignments. And that's something we worked really hard as a department and as a district to sort of mediate over the last several years. The other 2 key takeaways were that the impacts on social and academic well-being, again, this is something that has become top of mind. I think it's always been there, but where people are more comfortable talking about it. And so talking about the potential disruptions to not only academics, but extracurricular activities, peer relationships, and staff relationships. I've developed bonds with this particular staff, and I'm nervous about going to a different school with different staff and having to redevelop those types of relationships. Community and neighborhood unity. This is different from proximity in the sense that this is less about how close the school is to my home, and it's more about, does my community get to go to school together? At least let us go to school together. And so sometimes they're actually at odds. There are some that will comment about community and neighborhood unity and say proximity is just not that important. We just want to make sure we're all going to school together. And so you'll see some of that in this common ground slide that I'm about to show you. So one of the benefits of this particular tool is that the AI that supports it allows us to look at the data in a whole bunch of different ways. And one of the things it allows us to do is to say, okay, there might be a group out there that says proximity and commute considerations are really, really key and important. And they're rating thoughts in that sort of category with a high rating, kind of a thumbs up rating. And there might be another group that's like, that's just not important to me, and they're not really rating it very high. So that group that's not rating it very high may be rating calendar consistency and families really high, and they're maybe not necessarily focusing on proximity and commute. So what we found is that if I was on side A, I was probably rating that side B comment really low, and if I was on side B, I was rating that side A comment pretty low. But what we did agree on was stability for students. Not a shock. However, we've got the analytics to show that regardless of where we sit on these 2 topics, stability for students is something that we can all agree on in those 2 groups. Similarly, another group we looked at was those that were talking about calendar consistency versus academic offerings. These were actually up and down of each other. However, they did agree again on stability for students. And then another group that really popped out was the stability for the rising 10th graders. We had a lot of families participating that are impacted by the opening of Felton Grove, really hoping that more students could have stability transfers and be able to stay at their current school. They weren't so worried about calendar consistency, perhaps because they're high school students and know there's not a lot of options there, but that's not something that they were terribly worried about. However, those that were rating calendar consistency high were like, I don't care about the 10th graders. I mean, I don't mean it that way, but we're like, that's not top of mind for us. Maybe we have middle school students, so we're not worried about it. They actually came to agreement on proximity and commute issues. So just some more ways for us to look at the data to help us figure out what is most important to the community and where we can address those and where maybe we need to continue to find ways to address them in the future. So all of those summaries of those individuals, as well as all of this information that we've shared here, is available on our enrollment proposal site, and that should be, I'm double checking, we're good, yep, it's all live at this point, so families can start exploring all of that. So today, we're here to talk to you about the feedback we received, so not just the key takeaways, not just some summary data, but individual discrete points of concern and questions, and walk through where we are as a staff in terms of responding to those. So this is a different approach from previous years. So for those of you that were with us when we did the presentation last year, this is a slightly different approach because we really have been listening to the community saying that we need clearer answers. So we're trying our best. So the first concern or question that kept coming up that was quite, and I will say, these are largely frequent, but there's a handful that are unique but need to be addressed. This is frequent, right? This showed up quite a lot. A lot of the families that are impacted by the opening of Felton Grove really would prefer that the district find a way to open it with just 9th grade and not have to impact 10th grade students, specifically because they have concerns about the stability for those students that are rising into 10th grade. They're worried about academic and extracurricular and athletic opportunities that might shift or change for those students, and just those community connections that they have with their established school or that they have established at their current school. Moving forward, I will not read everything on each of these slides, but I'll just kind of walk us through this one as an example. So what we're saying that is that as a district, here's our response. One thing is full program offerings and talking with our academics teams and our budget teams. In order to have a true, full, and complete academic program, we really need both 9th and 10th grade students so that not only can we have full academic programming, but also be able to offer true choices for extracurricular activities and be able to have that full range of sports teams. You need a certain total number of students for those things to be able to happen. The next idea is building a school community. When you have both 9th and 10th opening the school, it just gives you a stronger foundation for developing the community of that school and being able to really make those strong culture shifts right from the start. Relieving overcrowding. In this particular instance, Felton Grove is opening largely in part to address the overcrowding and continued overcrowding at Apex Friendship High School. If we can relieve it by taking both 9th and 10th grade students out, it does a much better job of supporting that need. Support for stability. We are still recognizing that we're trying our best to offer families as much stability as possible. So although we can't let all 10th graders stay, those that have an older sibling, we are recommending that they be allowed to remain at the current school with their older sibling and not be impacted by the reassignment. Basically put in that stability transfer and ask to stay. And then because the high school situation is a little bit different from our elementary schools in the sense that those 11th and 12th graders will remain assigned to their current school and there will be some level of transportation in those neighborhoods, these younger siblings will have some eligibility for transportation for at least a year or two as they transition over completely as a neighborhood to the new school. So we don't say no transportation firmly at the high school level because there is some level of transportation that may be available for these students. The transition support. We recognize that the transition is going to be difficult and our team stands at the ready to support not only the families but clearly the students as they are transitioning into these new schools. And then long-term stability. If we open the school with both 9th and 10th grade at the sufficient number, then this allows us to have long-term stability for these communities and these students over time where they will stay then through the 12th grade and be able to have more relief at the other schools so that we have stability across all areas. Another question that we receive frequently from families that are impacted by this assignment change at the Felton Grove level is, okay, we hear you that overall 10th grade may not be possible, but there are a handful of students that are in unique programs that are cohort designed, meaning once the 9th grader goes on to 10th grade, if they leave the program, no one can backfill that seat because of the rigid nature of the programming. So if they were to leave, no student gets to take advantage of that seat. It sort of is left vacant. In addition, because these programs are specific career and technical education academies, they wouldn't be duplicated at Felton Grove. It would have its own overtime. And so families were just saying, hey, can we look at that differently? And the short answer is Yes, we think we can. Historically, we do have a precedent as a district of honoring these types of requests. We usually just ask the families to wait until the traditional transfer period. However, with the migration to Infinite Campus and the way that scheduling is done these days, much earlier in the semester, our recommendation to staff is going to allow them to be eligible right away during the stability window so that they can be on the books and ready to go, so that when registration starts in January, they're already available to select their courses. So we do have a planned adjustment. You'll see that at the lower end of the screen, that we would say, yes, those students that are verified as rising 10th graders in either of these two programs at Apex Friendship or Apex High be allowed not only to be eligible for the transfer, but be able to participate during the stability window. Keeping in the zone of stability transfers and eligibility for stability transfers, particularly at the elementary level, we had a lot of families say, why are the rules different? It feels like they're different for this school than they are for that school. We really want to have expanded stability for all families across all grades. And so what you'll see here is that we've outlined that really the distinction is the assignment recommendation related to the opening of a new school, in which we need a sufficient number of students, similar to what we just described for Felton Grove High School. We need a sufficient number of kindergarten through third grade students to be able to offer the proper academic programming, all the specials, all that sort of thing. So we have expanded and added fourth graders to the eligibility rules for new schools. As I mentioned earlier, it used to just be fifth. And we've let those younger siblings, we've expanded those rules to let the younger siblings join, even as early as the rising kindergartners. So we're sticking with that as a recommendation just from an operational efficiency standpoint and to make sure that the proper academic programming can be available. The difference on the existing schools is they already have a complement of staff. They already have programs that are fully operational and fully staffed. So if we are more slow in the gradual shift of the assignment from the current school to the newer different school, that's a little bit more manageable, and we can still offer all of the academic programming that we need to for students while being a little bit more generous with the stability rules. It does mean that the current school will stay crowded a little bit longer as they're letting those students sort of move through that eligibility of stability, but it doesn't impact the ability for the district to provide proper academic programming for the students. And again, the focus on stability. While we would love for the rules to be the same across the board, we were trying not to minimize the eligibility for one group so that they'd be the same. We wanted to give as expansive stability as we possibly could to as many families as we possibly could in response to the feedback we've been hearing over the last couple of years. And again, we're always at the ready for transition support for any families that aren't eligible for stability transfers that would be transitioning to the new school. One that you've heard from frequently, and actually this is the area that was those top 3 rated thoughts that we talked about in the thought exchange, and I believe some of the community members have already spoken at your meetings. Ashley Downs and Pearson Farm subdivisions had asked if they could remain assigned to Olive Chapel Elementary rather than the newly renovated Baucom. And they really are focusing on their proximity, and they're focusing on that value that they have for the community partnerships with the school. And we don't want to act like we don't know how close they are to the school. We do know. So just as a reminder, this was the map that we presented to you in the initial draft in September. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see where they are. The area that's highlighted in the circle towards the center of the screen, that represents the general location of these two neighborhoods. It is extremely close to Olive Chapel. It is on the other side of 540, and yes, there is a sidewalk that connects, but it's not one that our district would consider to be safe for a walk zone because of the rate of speed of the roadway itself and the narrowness of the sidewalk. If you've ever been in that area, it's just not a true wide sidewalk for school. It's not set back. And it is literally crossing over 540. It does have guardian. I mean, it is a safe walk zone if you've got an adult with you or something like that. But as a walk yourself to school, it's just not something the district would ever list as a no transportation zone. So we do hear that. But we just want to remind you that the reason for the original recommendation was because of this projected crowding for Olive Chapel. It is one of our longstanding CAP schools that continues to operate well above its operational efficiency rate, or its capacity of 856. Keep in mind that a chunk of that capacity is provided by trailers that are aging. And so in order to relieve Olive Chapel with the expanded capacity available at the newly renovated Baucom, remember it was 508 to begin with and now it's 716 at its newly renovated site, we wanted to take advantage of that capacity. And I just want to go back real quick because we've been asking, but why us? Why not someone else? If you look at the green, that represents Olive Chapel's base attendance area. The remaining portions of the attendance area are to the west of the school. and Baucom is located to the east of the school. So these are the closest families that could go to Baucom and relieve Olive Chapel. Anyone else would be an even further move to have to kind of hop over Olive Chapel to get to Baucom. So it's not a logical assignment path. And there's a lot of growth coming in that portion of the west. I've sort of already talked you through this, so I'll kind of let this sit here for just a moment, and you're certainly welcome to read this and ask questions as we get toward the end, but we talked through those safety considerations. Because this is a school, Olive Chapel, that's already open, and Baucom that's already open, we are making the recommendation that those expanded stability transfer options be available, so any student that's already attending the school would be eligible for the stability transfer, and their incoming siblings. So we feel like that's sort of the compromise we can make with this recommendation. This same area posed a slightly different question, which was, okay, let's say this goes through and we do end up assigned to Baucom, that's a calendar change. And our elementary school will now be traditional, but our base, because of where we're located, is still currently Lufkin Road Middle, which operates on the multi-track year-round calendar. Why in the world don't we have a traditional middle school? And they're correct. So what we're proposing here is a short-term solution, which we talked about a little bit at the table in September, but we wanted to clarify. The short-term solution would be to allow the families to apply for traditional calendar at Apex Middle, which is consistent with what's happening in that region. That means it does come with district transportation, and it's just maintaining an option there, as well as then having a very specific focus on a long-term solution. If you'll recall, as a board, you made the decision to delay the opening of Parkside Middle. There were some site swaps that came really late in the summer, and it was way too late for us to pivot and respond to and have a really authentic plan for you for middle schools in this region. So we will be bringing back to you, we're telling you today, we'll be coming back next year with some recommendations for middle school adjustments in this area that just can't wait until Parkside Middle opens up to address not only the calendar mismatch that we have here, but also some other crowding concerns in the region. So the long-term solution is as early as 26, 27, we'll be bringing to you some recommendations to make a better alignment here. Because as a district, we certainly want to move away from intentionally having a traditional elementary go to a multi-track year-round. We're trying really hard to work away from those types of assignments. The other way might happen, as you know, because we need the capacity at the elementary level. The other side of this is the year-round continuity. Since every single student in this area is going to be eligible to remain at Olive Chapel on the multi-track year-round or Salem Elementary, because their current base middle schools are already multi-track year-round, they kind of have whichever option works for their family. So they can have K-8 calendar alignment multi-track, or they can have K-8 calendar alignment traditional. Will help them with whichever makes the most sense for their family. We were cautious to make a specific recommendation to fully make Apex Middle, let's say, the base, because it is still serving as the overflow for Apex Friendship Middle School. And so we have some concerns in the region that we need to address before we can say that there's truly available capacity for a permanent assignment change at Apex Middle. So we do have a planned adjustment here. Any of those addresses don't currently see Apex Middle as a traditional calendar option. We'll make sure that they have that as an option for 25, 26, and then we'll get that long-term solution prepared for you for the 26, 27. In this same general area, talking about Baucom, we have the Seagroves Farm, or I think there's supposed to be an apostrophe, I apologize. The Seagroves Farm subdivision, they're asking to remain at Baucom Elementary rather than be assigned to Penny Road, or if that's not possible, perhaps consider Apex Elementary, mostly for stability of assignment and staying in the Apex community. We did look at this, and we just want to identify for you where it is. This is basically the same map we showed you previously, but just highlighting where that subdivision is currently located. And this is the map that we shared with you during the September 3rd presentation. As a reminder, Apex Elementary already with the current recommendations is projected to be between 96 and 99% crowded over the next couple of years. The cap was just removed from that school this past February. So, and there's an additional subdivision that's coming online in its current base attendance area. So we're hesitant to assign more students to Apex Elementary. That would then further cause another reassignment need a couple of years from now. So at this time, the recommendation to assign this neighborhood from Baucom to Penny Road is still what staff would recommend. And you can see here sort of a reiteration of all the things that we just discussed. Again, because this is an existing school to existing school, any student that's already attending Baucom would be eligible under the stability rules to stay, whichever grade, and those incoming kindergarten siblings would also be welcome to join. There wasn't as much discussion on this particular request about distance, but it is roughly a half a mile further to Penny than it is to Baucom from this area, so it's not a significant change in total travel time. It's a different pattern, obviously, but not distance-wise, it's not too much different. Speaking again about this general area, this is specific to the opening of Pleasant Plains Elementary. There are families in the Casa subdivision asking about, hey, we thought you were going to take us from going to 3 different schools to 2 different schools. And could you not maybe look at the map one more time, and is there another way to perhaps do this a little bit differently? Perhaps look at the newly developing Depot 499 that's under construction today and is just now starting to have students in it. So we looked at that and we investigated that. We just want to talk you through the numbers. Originally, this is what we presented to you as the schools that would be impacted by the opening of Pleasant Plains. Again, trying to relieve both Apex Friendship and Olive Chapel over time, as well as Scotts Ridge. This was the attendance area that we originally identified for Pleasant Plains, and I want to show you where these neighborhoods are. So the arrow on the left of the screen that's pointing to kind of the yellow highlighted area represents where the neighborhood is. That's a little bit of Bella Casa. It's a portion of Bella Casa. It's also Holland Farm. So these 2 neighborhoods are off of Holland Road and currently go to Scotts Ridge Elementary. The original proposal that we brought to you had them coming out of Scotts Ridge and going to Pleasant Plains. The area in pink just to the left of that almost looks like a peninsula was recommended to come from Olive Chapel into Scotts Ridge. So unintentionally, we still had Bella Casa going to 3 different schools, and the goal was to try to get them down to 2 schools. So our subdivisions were trying really hard to, if they're going to be split, maybe just split twice instead of 3 times. The area that's highlighted in pink that's pointed to from the right side, that's the location of that newly developing Depot 499 subdivision that is extremely proximate to both Pleasant Plains and Scotts Ridge, but it's a portion of it's actually going to have roadway access directly to Pleasant Plains. So based on this feedback and based on this analysis, the original recommendation would have had Scotts Ridge and Pleasant Plains at 76 and 67% in the first year of the plan, but the goal here would be to actually adjust the plan. We do feel that having Depot 499 go to Pleasant Plains Elementary and have that portion of Bella Casa and Holland Farms remain assigned to Scotts Ridge is a workable solution. It does get Bella Casa to where they're in 2 schools instead of 3. And it also gets the new Depot 499 to be part of that starter community that'll develop the culture at Pleasant Plains. So we do have a recommended adjustment here. We'll talk about it in more detail in the summary. In this same area, we have other neighborhoods that are being impacted by the moves related to the opening of Pleasant Plains, one of which is Jordan Pointe. Jordan Pointe is currently assigned to Scotts Ridge Elementary. There's 2-fold pieces here. The community is really concerned about the calendar change because Scotts Ridge operates on a traditional calendar and Pleasant Plains is proposed to open multi-track year-round. And then there's a little bit that's distance related. However, with Scotts Ridge and Pleasant Plains being so close to each other, it's actually, it's not much. It's a half a mile closer to Jordan Pointe to go to Pleasant Plains than Scotts Ridge, but that's obviously a negligible change in distance. So the idea here is to relieve Scotts Ridge Elementary, which is one of our capped schools that is actively capping students out. This was the original sort of highlighted area in pink. If you look on the left side, all of the area that's pink is the current Scotts Ridge Elementary base attendance area. And with the shifts, we were recommending the yellow become the base for Pleasant Plains. Just to give you some direction, this area highlighted on this slide shows you where the Jordan Pointe subdivision is located. So it is technically closer to Pleasant Plains than Scotts Ridge. As I mentioned, it's about a half a mile. It's not a significant difference. However, because of the ongoing crowding at Scotts Ridge and the need to relieve crowding at Olive Chapel, we are not recommending an adjustment to the plan based on this feedback. Another community impacted by the opening of Pleasant Plains, or a set of communities, are Belterra and Woodbury subdivisions that are currently assigned to Apex Friendship Elementary. This area was assigned to Apex Friendship Elementary the year that it opened. It is currently in its third year of operations, so it is true this is one of our tight turn reassignments in the sense that they were reassigned 3 years ago into Apex Friendship Elementary, and in year 4 are being asked to be assigned to a different school. Just the crowding in this region, you'll look at the projected crowding for Apex Friendship Elementary, again, a cap school that's actively capping on the order of 200 plus students are out to a different school. It's just not tenable in terms of a long-range sustainable plan for the school. So the effort here is to reduce the crowding. Just for a location reference for you, they're generally in this area of the current Apex Friendship Elementary base attendance area. It is true that they are going further to get to Pleasant Plains. That's not an untrue statement. We did double check. It is not a no transportation zone. There were some community members that were indicating perhaps they could walk to Apex Friendship from their neighborhood, but it's not something that we as a district have identified as a no transportation zone. It is about 2 miles farther to Pleasant Plains from their current school assignment. And sometimes these maps don't do justice because the scales aren't on them, so I just wanted to give you that as a point of reference. But at this point, based on the crowding concerns that we have at Apex Friendship Elementary and the ongoing growth in the remaining portion of its attendance area, we are not recommending a change to the plan at this time. Moving a little bit more into the Holly Springs area, specifically related to the opening of Rex Road, another community that has asked for reconsideration is Stonemont. That subdivision is preferring to remain assigned to Holly Grove Elementary rather than being assigned to Rex Road, and recently have started asking maybe for a high school assignment change. We weren't prepared to respond to that one today, but I can talk about it just a little bit. At the elementary level, because that came in really late. At the elementary level, we just wanted to let you know that the goal here was Holly Grove is one of our CAP schools, and we were looking to not only relieve the crowding at the school here, but this is that area of the district where we were looking to do some regional cascades to also relieve the crowding at Herbert Akins Road Elementary and some other schools in the region, and use a cascading impact. So this is what was presented to you in September as the potential assignment area for Rex Road. And what's highlighted here is the physical location of the Stonemont subdivision. As you can see, it's somewhat equidistant between those two schools. I think my analysis, or our analysis, showed that it's about a half-mile difference to go to Rex Road over Holly Grove. It is in a different direction, we'll acknowledge that, but the total distance is about a half-mile longer to go to Rex Road than it is to go to Holly Grove. Both schools are projected to operate on a multi-track calendar, so this isn't a calendar issue, but there is, because it's Rex Road, the fact that it's a new school, we would have those more restricted stability rules. Just the kindergarten through third grade, just the 4th and 5th grade students would be eligible to remain, and any younger siblings that they have. At this time, based on the overall goal for the region and the overall shifts that we're recommending to support all schools in the region, we would not recommend an adjustment to the plan. But we are prepared to support families as they transition. All right, we're getting close. Going back to Felton Grove High School, this is different from stability. This is specifically about subdivisions and neighborhoods. There's 3 neighborhoods that have actively been petitioning us to reconsider assignment into Felton Grove out of Apex Friendship High School: Addison Pond, Trinity Creek, and 12 Oaks. They're all west of 55. And they're in a very large area in terms of student and population area. They're also below US 1. So we'll talk you through it. But just as a reminder, I think somehow in our communications it's gotten lost that really one of the main reasons that we were opening Felton Grove High School was to relieve the crowding at Apex Friendship High School. And this is the only area that's somewhat proximate to Felton Grove that's also assigned to Apex Friendship High School. So in order to relieve Apex Friendship High School, this is the most logical area to go to, also from a total enrollment perspective as well, not just geographically. As you can see here, this is what we presented to you in September as a proposed attendance area, the highlighted yellow on the right being the recommended map. So just for edification, just so that you know where it's located, this circle highlights the area of all 3 of them. They're in relatively close proximity to each other along this roadway. So that's just where they are. There have been concerns about crossing 55, just from a traffic and congestion perspective. Those of you who may be familiar with this region, it's a no left turn area, so you do have to make U-turns to make left turns, and that would be required in order to get to Felton Grove. However, all community members in this region have to access that road in the same way. There are multiple, as with most high schools, there's multiple routes to get to the school. So we did do a quick analysis, just a total distance. The total distance to Apex Friendship, roughly from this area, can be anywhere from, let's say, 7.2 to 9.1 miles, where to Felton Grove it would range anywhere from 7.4 to 11.8. So the total travel distance is different, but the travel time perhaps could be different. There were also concerns about safety, traveling and navigating both sets of routes, both to Apex Friendship High School current and Felton Grove projected. There are things that a teen driver would have to be conscious about and think about as they're driving on either route. They're different concerns, but there are concerns for teen drivers that they would need to be really vigilant as they're navigating either path. The other thing we were looking at here is there was a lot of conversation about, well, could something on the west of 55 be assigned instead of us and perhaps make room at Holly Springs for us? And we really did look at that, and that just creates even more instability for even more families. And we were really trying hard to identify the smallest group of students we could to assign into Felton Grove and not cascade, because we know at the high school level how important it is to try to maintain as much stability as possible for assignment. So at this time, staff is not prepared to make an adjustment to the recommendation based on this feedback. However, we do recognize and understand the concerns that have been brought forward. Again, related to Felton Grove, there have been some questions. Again, this is sort of what I alliterated to just a moment ago, or alluded to, excuse me, is there's a community called Sunset Ridge that's really large geographically, and there's a portion that's on the north side of Holly Springs Road, and there's a portion that's on the south side of Holly Springs Road, and the portion on the north side has been recommended for assignment into Felton Grove based on its proximity to the school, as well as the fact that I believe that some of them are currently at Holly Springs High School, so it provides a little bit of relief. A large portion, I believe, are actually at Apex High School. So we looked at this and we wanted to share the difference here. So just, it's harder to see because it's overlapping a pink portion of the map, but it's the circle on the east side of 55 and that lower portion. This is where that south portion of the subdivision is located. And we did look, they're relatively equidistant to both Felton Grove and Holly Springs. Yes, there's some highway crossing that needs to be done to get to Holly Springs. At this time, based on the proposal that we currently have in place for Felton Grove, it is projected to be sufficiently full in the short term, in the next several years, and we are nervous that if we add even more students to it, it would then become overcrowded and perhaps need other capping or something like that, and we're trying to avoid that. So what we're recommending at this time is not to make any more revisions to the assignment area for the school. We're not recommending taking Sunset Ridge South and maybe adding it to Felton Grove. However, we would continue to monitor this area, and if anything changes with the development patterns that were originally projected for Felton Grove, it certainly would be an area we could come and look at for potential assignment in the future. But for the stability of the students and to avoid putting ourselves in a situation where we might be overcrowding Felton Grove or leaving Holly Springs under-enrolled, we are not recommending a change at this time. And then as we get into the Fuquay Varina area, the one new school we haven't talked about yet is Bowling Road Elementary. Bowling Road Elementary, as you'll recall, is located on the same campus as the newly renovated, constructed, it's hard, they shifted to their new site, right, Fuquay Varina Middle. And so there's been some discussion and some concern, particularly in the thought exchange, about, hey, these two schools are on the same campus and you're recommending Bowling Road be multi-track year-round, even though Fuquay Varina Middle is traditional. We were open and honest about that during our September presentation. We do recognize that that's not something as a district we necessarily have a precedent for. We just want to talk through why that is the recommendation and maybe a little bit of a what if. So just as a friendly reminder, this is the area that we've identified as the potential base or the proposed base for Bowling Road Elementary. It incorporates 5 different schools. If you'll recall, I mentioned during our September presentation that we kind of had to do what we had to do in this area while we waited for Bowling Road to open. And so we've got some fragmented assignment areas, and this will allow us to have a nice cohesive and contiguous assignment area for Bowling Road. At this time, with the multi-track recommendation, it's already projected to open around 70% crowded, which at this time would make it our largest new elementary school in this batch. It's got an existing population in the current proposed attendance area, and then it would continue to grow over time. If we were to just play the what-if game and say, hey, what happens if we open it traditional? That would change to a 90 and 92% crowding. As a friendly reminder, that's what the projected crowding was for Apex Friendship Elementary in its first year, and by February of its first year of operations, it was capped. There's not a lot of difference in the growth in this region from Apex Friendship Elementary, so staff at this time would be hesitant to recommend a change in calendar because we don't want to be in a situation where we're capping a school in its first year of operations. So we did want to talk through what else could happen. So if we were to move forward with a traditional calendar for Bowling Road, there's lots of potential outcomes. We could either continue to have continued crowding at the nearby schools because of having to shift maybe the attendance area. We might have to cap this school or nearby schools because if you'll recall, I'm going to go back real quick because we didn't sit on it for very long. If you look at the projected crowding for the impacted schools, almost all of them are at or above 100%, some well above 100%. So some of these would have to continue to maintain that level of crowding, which we were working hard to avoid adding caps to any of these schools. It could be that one of the other nearby schools might need to become multi-track to give us the capacity that we need. We don't talk about it a lot at this stage in the process, but friendly reminder, bless you, that the K-3 class size legislation does impact our elementary schools differently than it does our middle and high schools. And so being able to manage that crowding is very different at an elementary school than it is at a high school because of those class size ratios. Additional assignments, perhaps our goal was to do this and walk away and not have to do any more assignments with the exception of opening Hilltop Needmore and to leave these communities alone, that we wouldn't be able to uphold that sort of theory moving forward. We know if we were to open a traditional, we'd have to come back to this area and do some additional reassignments perhaps. Or identify somehow, some way, I'm looking to Mark because he's probably going to strangle me, find another lot and build another school, which then would potentially impact our ability to do renovations elsewhere, right? So there's just these are all the potential ways we could address this if we weren't to open it multi-track year round. So there's concerns. So at the staff level, from a long-term stability perspective, although we do understand the complexity this may create for families, right now as staff from a long-range planning perspective, we just don't feel like we could recommend it be traditional. One of the other areas that was included in this year's plan that was presented to you in September was a portion of the Carroll Middle School base that's part of the Barton Pond Elementary base attendance area, saying, hey, we're split a little bit. Our fifth graders from Barton Pond are going to a couple of different middle schools. We're looking for a little bit better cohort continuity. When we read the feedback from these communities, it was very split. 60-40, 50-50 kind of thing, where it was really hard to tell if there was full community support for this particular recommendation. So just as a reminder, it's this portion here that sort of splits right between, or is that one? What's that word? Glenwood?
You've got Creedmoor, is that side of the Ray Road is the
Yeah,
other side.
just so everybody knows where we are. I forgot to label them on my slide. So in this area, we're going to recommend that we pull this from the plan at this time and then come back to this community in the spring and have longer conversations. Mr. Hegarty, you had mentioned that we need to talk about some of the high schools in the area as well. So have a more meaningful conversation with the community in the spring to determine what a better long-term solution would be. So we are going to recommend that we remove this from the plan at this time and come back to the community for further exploration. As a reminder, this was not being made based on any kind of crowding concerns or utilization concerns. It was really just to try to address some cohort continuity concerns. And if that's not solving that, then let's have a longer conversation about that. Then as we get towards the end of some of the more commonly asked questions, one is, hey, we used to have a rich history of offering transportation with some of those opposite calendar choices. What happened? Can we please get it back? This is really challenging for us as families. We hear that. We understand that. The historical context here that I've presented is just to remind everybody, when we first started introducing both traditional and year-round schools, we really did work to offer transportation so that families who were base assigned perhaps to a year-round school would have an option for traditional with transportation and vice versa. Over time, our bus driver shortage, running separate routes into these neighborhoods at the same level, it's just become untenable for us. It's just really not feasible system-wide. So in recent years, we have worked to reduce the strain on our transportation system by gradually removing some of this transportation. However, we do realize this is challenging for families, because if you really do rely on district transportation, then it does narrow the choices that you truly have. We do hear and understand that. Right now, we do want to remind everyone that if you don't see that opposite calendar with transportation on the address lookup, that doesn't mean you can't ask for it. You certainly can participate either in our magnet or our transfer processes to ask for a different school. We genuinely will work to help families that are in hardship and help them. We just can't commit to having transportation with all of those. This was a small question. It was not asked by a large number of people, but it's a very nuanced question that's very important to consider. For some of our families that are perhaps, let's say, the Apex Friendship base attendance area or the Scotts Ridge base attendance area, and maybe even Holly Grove Elementary's base attendance area, they've moved into that area. They were the last ones to move in, so they got overflowed or capped out of their elementary school and sent somewhere else. In the case of, we can use the Apex Friendship as a really clear example because perhaps they went to Baucom, then Baucom went to Woods Creek site during its renovation, and then perhaps they got called back over the summer to go to Apex Friendship. So their child quite literally could have attended 3 different campuses, and the families never moved. And the families never put in a transfer request. And the families never asked for a magnet seat. We recognize that this could be a challenge. So what these families are asking is, can we at least know whether or not we're going to get called back so that we can know what kind of stability requests we're making, and are there any provisions the district could make for those of us that might truly have had all of those campuses and we're not 4th or 5th graders. And so the short answer is we can fix the timeline piece. So we are going to recommend that, particularly for those that are impacted by the plan, we're going to work with those principals to just see, is there any chance that you could have a mid-year callback? Because some of our elementary schools, if families move away, a couple of seats open up, we can call some students off of the wait list. So that families will know concretely whether or not they're going to have a seat at that school or not, so they know what type of stability request they're asking for. Separately, we would work with you as a board during the regular transfer period to address any of the those nuanced circumstances where perhaps I have been disproportionately impacted by movement because of capping and overcrowding and renovations. So we are willing to work with both sets of families. But here we're going to specifically adjust the timeline. So as a reminder, all of the information that we've just gone over is available for you on our enrollment proposal site, along with any other FAQs we've already addressed throughout the process. I highly encourage families to go to the site and look at the FAQ section, because all of the information we've shared here, if it's not posted today, will be posted soon. And then any other questions that we've already addressed, we've been updating those on the fly after every information session. So if the last time you looked at it was September 3rd, you'll notice there's a lot more information there today. So we talked about a lot, and I want to be really clear about what adjustments are specifically being recommended, and then we can talk through the timeline. So the specific recommendations that we're making are related to the stability rules, which we talked about on slides 42 and 43, the new school of Pleasant Plains in particular, which we talked about on slides 58 through 63, the existing school for Carroll Middle we just recently talked about on slides 100 to 103, the calendar application changes we mentioned for those impacted by the Olive Chapel to Baucom reassignment, slides 51 and 52, and then what we just mentioned about the callbacks for the timeline on 106, 107. So we are making 5 specific recommended adjustments based on the feedback we've heard from the community. So just as a quick reminder about the stability rules, we're not changing the recommendations at the elementary level. We really feel like 4th and 5th grade is as generous as we can be and still have fully functioning schools at our new elementary sites. We tested the waters with Woods Creek this year, if you'll recall, and it worked. But if we went any more generous with the stability rules, it would have been hard for him to staff the school. This is the update that we're making. So for the new high school, not only will those 9th and 12th grade siblings, 9th and 10th grade siblings of the older students that aren't being reassigned be eligible for a stability transfer, but so will be those students that we've identified that are actively participating in the AOE or AOIT programs at their respective schools, so that they can stay in that program going into the 10th grade. Because of the other stability rules, the rising 11th and 12th graders are already covered because they're not being reassigned. And just as a reminder, you cannot be admitted to the program until you're officially assigned to the school, so there won't be a rising 9th grade cohort to address.
But siblings, maybe.
The siblings and that we would have to talk about separately, yeah. Because yes, did not mean to be opaque. So here we were talking just about those students that are in the program. We were not extending it to the rising 9th grade siblings, so that would be something we would need construction on. The other elementary changes, we're not recommending any adjustments because they're already as generous as they can be. Same thing for middle school recommendations, same thing for high school recommendations. They're already as generous as they can be, so we don't have any changes for those. The other recommendation was related to Pleasant Plains, so just as a reminder where it's located, this was the original recommendation in September, and here's what we're talking about now, that we have an adjusted attendance area for this. We do have an updated detailed map in the addendum of the packet for those that want to really look at it closely, and our address lookup tool has already been updated with this recommended revision as well. So just as a reminder, this would have Depot 499, a big portion of Depot 499 coming into Pleasant Plains Elementary. There is a portion that exits onto Apex Barbecue, and it makes sense for them to stay at Scotch Ridge, but the bigger part would be going to Pleasant Plains. And then leaving that portion of Bella Casa and Holland Farms at Scotts Ridge and just not changing their assignment, effectively removing them from it. And so you can see here with this recommendation, it does open Pleasant Plains a little bit lower. However, with the active growth in its base attendance area, this is not concerning for us. We feel like this would be a sustainable path forward. And it does allow Scotts Ridge to have less significant reduction in enrollment in its first year of the plan. Here we talked about removing this recommendation, so quite simply, we're just striking through, and we will stick with the original attendance areas for Carroll and Leesville Road Middle respectively. Carroll Magnet. This is an addition with the area specifically coming out of Olive Chapel being projected to go to Baucom Elementary. There is that portion does not for the 24-25 school year see Apex Middle listed as a traditional calendar option. So this would add that in as a traditional calendar option. It would just be a stretch over from an area that already has it. So from a routing perspective, it's just extending an existing route. It's not putting any additional pressure on the system. And then here we just talked about changing that timeline so that families would have a better understanding of whether or not they could have a mid-year callback at one of their CAP schools if they're currently overflowed. So we are recommending a change because normally we don't make those calls till December, January, and then that would be after the stability transfer had already closed. So we want to make sure that those families have all the information they possibly can have before they make that decision in December. And just as a reminder, Magnet has kicked off. The application period opened up yesterday. If you have not had a chance to check out your choices, please do. The Magnet Fair will be October 26th. We already had our early college fair. We already have applications coming in. It's a wonderful time of year for that process. We are right now tentatively proposing that we open the stability transfer window on December 4th, but I say that because there's a lot of technical things that have to happen perfectly for that to happen because our approval date is that day before the Thanksgiving break. So timing has to line up perfectly, but we will work with families to make sure they're well informed and know exactly what to do and when to do it and how to expect that information. We'll talk about this in greater detail in November, but just so you know the timeline is there. And then we're here, we've done a lot. We've done a lot of work. We've talked about public we can to the site. We will have a new public comment capture tool. I do want to share that with you in response to feedback. This is another adjustment that we're responding to feedback. We heard from a lot of families that the current thought exchange is a little too brief. I can't put a lot of comments in it. It's hard for me to really explain my situation. And because it does have some confidentiality provisions, if I put my student's name in it, my thought might not get circulated for others to see. In addition, last year at this time, when we used the traditional form of the thought exchange with the star ratings, we heard a lot of feedback, why am I doing this again? You already know how I feel about things. So we're using a slightly different version of the thought exchange tool that will allow families to individually share information with us with a little bit more expanded information. It feels a little bit more like a survey, but it's more of a public comment capture tool. But I can still use the AI that sits behind it to give you a full summary report of everything that's being captured. So we're not going to ask families to rate thoughts this time around. We're just going to let them give us that individual information that they think we need, either in support of any of the adjustments that have been made or concerns about adjustments they're still wanting to see in the plan. We will have a virtual information session. I'm not sure how the thing on the middle of the screen, I apologize for that. We will host a virtual public information session a week from today to go over all of the recommended adjustments and answer any questions that families may have. And then you'll have your hearing on November 12th. My two favorite websites. And I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pulliam. That was 140 pages in just about 1 hour and 10 minutes, at just about 2 minutes a page. So that was amazing. I know a lot of work went into that. Thank you for everything you put together. Board members, I know that you have a lot of feedback to consider. Specific to our discussion, there were specific adjustments made both to assignment areas and to stability rules and some calendar options. If we want to start discussion there, or really branch out into any areas of concern for staff. Ms. Mahaffey, did you want to start?
Yes, actually. Thank you, and I appreciate the including the why behind the reasoning. I think having that on print is helpful. And although it may be disappointing for families to not see what they've been asking for, to see the why response in clear writing is something that we have not done. For the, I'm going to get right into it and just read off my Post-it notes. For the reassignment from Olive Chapel or Salem, not having a middle school traditional calendar option, is it going to be possible to do that stability, that K-8 stability, if they move to Baucom and they want Apex Middle? I'm assuming because of Friendship's numbers, right? I heard you say we're not able to make that change now. Can that be done during the stability transfer window, or will they have to wait until March?
So if they're not already attending the school, yes, they would need to wait till March to put in the request.
Okay.
Yes. Because it's not technically a reassignment for them, they're asking for a school change. But we would honor all the requests that are going for K-8 calendar alignment.
Okay. For Seagroves Farm, just to clarify, their middle school assignment would remain Apex Middle
Yes.
School with this proposed change.
And the area that is assigned to Penny Road that is just south of them, I think it's Waterford
Down,
Green or
Waterford
Glen,
Green, yeah.
Waterford Green, they have the same assignment as well, so they'd be a cohort going together
Okay.
from Penny to Apex Middle.
For the folks coming out of Scotts Ridge or Friendship Elementary School, going to Pleasant Plains, what would K-8 alignment look like for these families? Because they would have a traditional calendar elementary school. I know historically from folks that have been at Olive Chapel to Friendship, many families have made it work, many have opted for others, but what other options for these new families would they need to be looking at if they want K-8 calendar alignment?
In that region, depending on what works for their family, Lufkin Road or Salem Middle would be viable options for a multi-track if they wanted to have everybody on a K-8 calendar alignment. I think Lufkin would be physically more proximate to Pleasant, well, depending on their travel patterns. But I would say either one of those would be options, and they would just need to use the address lookup tool to see if either of those came with transportation or not. Some may, but we did not add transportation specifically because of the current concerns we have.
And I appreciated you highlighting on that very last, very nuanced slide, and just, I had written down concern for students that were capped to Baucom, went to Woodbury, moved back to Friendship,
And we'll add that because that nuance became that was a very specific nuance that became clear to us later in our process, and I couldn't get the slide in for the presentation, but we'll get that updated.
And then for families, their communication remains predominantly talking points so that we can capture their feedback.
It'll be it's a thought exchange
A thought
extension.
exchange. I'm sorry.
But yes, we'll have a thought exchange extension. It's going to look and feel a little bit different, but again, we did this in response to the feedback that we received last year around this time that, hey, we want to give you a little bit more details, we want to give you a little bit more information, and this way they can confidentially give us information that won't be seen by others. But we can summarize it for you all. And I didn't mention this, but prior to your public hearing, our goal is to get you a full, comprehensive public engagement report, and so that you'll have that going into the public hearing in addition to whatever people might be presenting to you at the public hearing.
And I appreciate you lifting up the Stonemont High School piece.
Yes.
We've been hearing that for quite some time. I will have more questions, but those are the ones that I have for now until I digest and go through this again. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Are there any other comments or questions about either the citizen feedback or the proposed adjustments? Doctor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciated the historical information about, how we responded to feedback, and then also, what basically you proved also this time that you responded to the feedback. The question I had was the Depot 499 subdivision that you mentioned. Was that directly coming from the feedback, the information about that subdivision?
So where the subdivision is located, it's right between both Scotts Ridge and Pleasant Plains, and so it could really have gone either way from an assignment standpoint, from a proximity standpoint. But the feedback that we received when we realized that a community was continuing to be split in 3 different ways and shifted while remaining split, that was feedback that we really dove into. We saw that, I think, on day 2 of the exchange and immediately got to work assessing and evaluating that.
So it's a really good example
Yeah,
of
very good.
where the people living in the community
Yes.
knows the community better than
Yes.
we do.
Yes.
And so they gave us some really constructive ideas on how to do
Yes.
things differently. And I think that's just to tell the people listening that it's, not for nothing.
Yes.
That you give this feedback, so. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ring. Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for all the work that you've done. Again, it's certainly been an evolution over 10 years, so I appreciate it. It's an example that we do listen. It may just take us a while to get there, which most processes do. So thank you both for your patience, for all the feedback that we've given you. I do agree. We've come a long way. One thing, I think you said this, but I want to make sure I heard you correct, because I did go back and look at each area that impacts mine. They're actually feedback summary. I don't think they're all updated, because Raleigh, Southeast Raleigh still has feedback from Western Wake under there, so just to FYI, although there were only 6 participants.
What you're seeing is what they rated.
Right, and so
It's
because there were
spots
only
that they rated. Yeah.
Right, but if I click on Fuquay and Garner, it's very specific to that area, and for Raleigh and Central and Southeast Raleigh, it's not. Again, there were only 6 participants, but I'd like to know what those 6 participants said. And that's when I don't mean the graphs, I actually mean if I click on view the comments. The comments are actually all Western Wake comments under there. Whereas Garner and Fuquay, I can see exactly what they said about Garner and Fuquay schools. So just.
So the only other thing there's 2 things that could happen here. One, it could be there just weren't that many for them to.
I'm sure it
rate
wasn't. It was
their
only 6 people.
The other, we noticed this the first year that we did this, alphabetically Central comes first. So some people will click it.
We probably should put
When
a
they
note
don't.
there, because if I live in Raleigh, HSHS does not mean anything to me. So just a note there for those 6 people who
Yes.
did. Again, back to, it's an evolutionary process, and I just also think it's like out of respect that if I didn't know this, I'd be trying to figure out what these schools are and are they relevant to me, especially because people are going to look at this who aren't the 6 people who attended, to your point about the increase in views. So just a word to wise, as we're putting it on our website, we should make clear that we are not leaving out Raleigh and Southeast Raleigh by giving you Western Wake information. So that's just a website thing. And then, again, also, you all are not surprised. Neither is the feedback. It is aligned to my point that I made when you presented this to us. I certainly understand why you made it from an efficiency and a district perspective, but it still just is not going to make sense to me and the people who have to go to a multi-track school on the same property as a traditional school. I don't have to re-outline what the parents said, because they all articulated every single concern that I elevated, and it's actually their lived experience that they would have to go through. So I won't bring those back up, but they're there for us to read for those who didn't hear Susan go through them, because you were, as Chris said, immaculate on getting 2 minutes per slide done. But they are there, so those continue to be my concerns. I appreciate the what if slide. I also appreciate the fact that you said we've not really looked, in my tenure, looked at moving a traditional school to a year-round school. I don't know that that's my recommendation, but it is my strong recommendation that we do not create that kind of havoc for parents. And again, I think it's the first time I'm probably making this note that I don't think it works for parents who noted that they can't, that it would ruin their life. Somebody put they would be in financial ruins if we did this, because they'd have to figure out how to pay for, because of course the younger child is in elementary, so they don't know how they would afford checkout camp. But on the other side of that are parents who were like, hey, you're messing up my vacation planning. So again, I do believe that that's both spectrums of our district in terms of where people are, both philosophically, but also where people, the impact that this would have on households' income. So I stand with my decision that this is not a good decision for the families who would be directly impacted. And I do appreciate the projection out to 2027, noting all those schools would be in the 90 percentile. And again, I'm not an advocate for capping schools, but more so I'm not an advocate for putting two different school types on the same property, especially when every district noted calendar alignment, even if it wasn't their top choice, and we would literally be going against what people listed in every district as a priority, which is you wouldn't even have calendar alignment for your children that are on the same property. So I won't belabor it. Those are my 2 points of concern. And then one to us that continues to be, I have a voicemail now that I actually think this one is nice. Buses will continue to be an issue for Raleigh and Southeast Raleigh if we don't figure out how to bring our kids back closer to home. Again, there were only 6, so that's why I was trying to see if that particularly thing came out. That's why I went to look at the feedback. But it was listed in your earlier slides that aren't on the website regarding bus length for those students. I think those are all 3 of the districts I touched.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson-Hostler. And, the discussion about bus lengths is important, right? Because we have so many people new to the community that might come from other areas where they might have a school on every block. And the idea of a school more than 10 minutes away seems like it's a long trip or burdensome. And then you look at the actual bus lengths some of our students have, and I just think it's important for context.
And traffic congestion was also noted.
Yes. All right. Are there any other questions for Ms. Pulliam, Mr. Carrozza, or anyone on staff?
I had one, and it's concerning Felton Grove and specifically the communities that are on the west side of 55 and their concerns about traffic. I've had the opportunity to drive in that area at that time when students would be going to school. It makes for my own kids' carpool to be real interesting and start early, but wanting to see it for myself. Can you talk about what you and your team have done for that area as far as, I know you had said you have driven around the area to see it yourself
And we've continuous conversations, both our team as well as facilities design and construction with the town of Holly Springs. There are roadway improvements that some have already been completed, some are underway. They have a long-range plan that they're working on, and I'm proud to say, are one of the municipalities that's been added to the group where they ask our thoughts before they approve development. So that partnership has become very fruitful to help us make sure that we're all on the same page and we know what's coming. The realities are that sometimes there'll be congestion, however, that could be seen candidly for a lot of our high schools in the region. But the town is working really well as a partner with us at this time. And so that's part of what we're looking at too. And as I mentioned, there's multiple routes to get to the school. So that's the other thing for families to remember, is that if one particular route is more of a congested route, please look at the others. We're not saying you have to take the toll road. In fact, I think that might actually be longer. A couple times I've assessed some of it. So that's kind of where we are. And then also making sure that any of the entry points into the school meet all of our standards so that we're not, creating long lines in carpool when they aren't necessary for the entrance to the school itself.
Thank you.
All right. Any final questions? Ms. Caulfield?
I was actually looking at the Felton Grove when I was looking at it on the map, and just coming from Wake Forest and knowing what it's like, even when you're in rural areas, to drive from one side to the other could be really tedious. And the building, as it happens, are we going to have to then turn around and rezone these people later on down the road? Because it looks like it's like southwest, I'm losing my direction, southwest all the way to northeast. As that starts to develop and build in there, and the school is all the way up at the top. So I'm just concerned that we're going to have to rezone these people again down the line.
What may not be obvious to people who aren't familiar with this region is a lot of what you're pointing to is near the Sharon Harris Nuclear Power Plant. And so that won't become
Okay,
housing
so it's
over
not-
time. However, we zone every inch of the
Right.
county to a school.
So that's in the lower.
Yes, where you
west
see the
side.
lake, where you see the lake
Towards the
at.
county line.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So
And I
the
do
mo-
think
most
you
of that,
mentioned
yes.
once before.
Most of that is not going to be developable land.
And the only other concern that I have is hearing families agreeing with, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, is just changing the families from the year-round to traditional or vice versa. Just really becomes, it is a strain on our parents. So it is a concern as we get them to have a better feeder pattern. I know you can't fit everything in one box, but we do hear what they're saying, and it's kind of difficult. It's very difficult, for them to align
And I
with
think
that.
staff really does take that into consideration as much as possible. I just want to reiterate, K-3 class size legislation really hampers our ability to use the traditional calendar at the elementary level to provide that.
It's hard, and I know you guys have been working on it. You showed us, plan after plan, and I do appreciate that it's getting a little bit more blocked so that it makes it more like you're in the general area, because being on the bus for an hour is just not okay. So that's the only concern that I have.
And if I may, we haven't shared it with you yet because it's still like an incubation phase, but we have been polling our families to say, when we're stuck in this situation, is reassignment or a calendar change, where are we fitting? And the percentage that are saying, leave me at my school and make me year-round, has increased significantly over the last couple of years. It's not saying that they enjoy it or that it's their preferred option, but if you cannot destabilize me with a future reassignment by making my current school year-round, right now, especially in the Southwest, we're seeing that that's a more prevalent response than over majority. It's not even like growing percentages, over the majority.
So the majority of families would rather switch to a year-round than to be relocated.
They want stability of school assignment as opposed to calendar.
But again, specific to that region, because it's where we've been opening the new schools, so we've been focusing our efforts there. I can't say that that would be broadly appropriate across the entire district.
And a majority is not necessarily all families, so.
Right, not all families, correct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, Ms. Poem, I really appreciate it. One thing I did want to close with, back on page 10, you set out the school enrollment planning process and where we are with the annual enrollment plan. Again, we'll come back in January and February, look at the review of cap schools, any changes or adjustments. Sometimes it takes a year or two after we adopt a plan to really feel comfortable that the changes we made are going to lead to significant changes where we can maybe uncap schools, and then sometimes we have schools that we hadn't anticipated that we do have to cap. After that, you have step 6, address other school utilization concerns in March and April. And what I'd like to ask, if the board's amenable to it, is around that time, we really start to begin our discussion about some of our middle school questions. Because as we've looked at this plan, we've seen a lot of examples of some middle schools that are just far over capacity, others that are far under capacity, and some middle schools that are in just poor shape, where maybe they're on the renovation list, maybe they need to be on the renovation list, but we need to really sort of plan this out so we don't do this piecemeal. And so maybe starting in the spring, we could start talking about those considerations and really get a good plan in place that we can all get behind, so that when staff starts working on the plan for the fall, they have all of this input on the front end. Does that sound like something people would support? Okay, great. All right. Ms. Poe and Mr. Croza, thank you very much. All right, and I'm happy to say that that concludes our work session agenda. Mr. Swanson,
I was just going to make a motion to go into closed session.
would you like to make that motion?
If that's okay, Ms. Irish. I don't want to take your thunder.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion to go into closed session.
Thank you. We have a motion from Mr. Swanson that we move into closed session to to consider the closed session agenda items listed on our regular meeting agenda for closed session and all the statutory reasons justifying that. And we have a second from Ms. Mahaffey. All in favor of moving to closed session for those purposes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll give the room about 5 minutes to clear, and then we'll continue into closed session.